So let's go ahead and stick with somewhat of an end of an era game here coming into this one. Potentially end of era. I mean, it's a lot of speculation here. Let's have another NFC West battle royale because we have the Seahawks versus the Arizona Cardinals. Now, Arizona, obviously, they still have an opportunity to win the NFC West depending on what happens against the Niners and Rams. Arizona is a 6.5-point favorite going against the Seattle Seahawks. Well, I mentioned end of era because one of the big reports coming out this week was either Russ is going to be on this team or Pete's going to be on this team, but neither are going to be on this team together. And even them being on this team at all is still a very subjective kind of conversation that's going on as far as the Seahawks' future. So this could be Russ's last game in Seattle. So definitely a landmark type game to talk about, regardless of the implications in the NFC West. But Russ has shown signs of getting healthier throughout the year. So I think we're starting to see at least a peaking Seattle team as opposed to what we saw when he initially came back off of that finger injury there. They put up 50 against the Lions for whatever it's worth. I know the Lions we don't think much of, but you put up 50 against any team, that's still somewhat noteworthy. They had a shootout type game against the Chicago Bears a couple weeks ago. Chicago's coming down strong in the last couple of weeks. So, Seattle, I wouldn't be surprised if you told me they can pull upset against, again, an Arizona team that prior to their win against the Cowboys, it dropped 3 straight. And speaking of Detroit, Arizona lost to Detroit in there too.
Mm-hmm.
So
Seattle right now looks exactly like the team Seattle was supposed to be this year if Russell Wilson didn't miss 6 games, which is the 7th seed in the NFC. The Seahawks are playing like the 7th seed in the NFC, and that's what they should have gotten. Like, even with Russell Wilson playing bad this year, which, Russell Wilson wasn't awful this year, but he just wasn't, elite. He was kind of somewhere in the middle. Even with that, they still had enough talent to be the 7th seed in the NFC this year. It's just Russell Wilson missed 6 games in the middle of the season, and that's the difference in winning 8 games or winning 10 games or winning 7 games and 9 games. Cause I keep forgetting they lost to the Bears. In my head, I associate that as a win for the Seahawks, but they technically lost to the Bears in that snow game. Also SDSU Aztecs fight. I'm wearing the Kawhi Leonard shirt because I grew up 3 minutes away from San Diego State's campus. Rashad Penny, 500 rushing yards in 3 games against the Houston Texans, Chicago Bears, and Detroit Lions, teams that we would not argue are great rushing defenses. But Rashad Penny, 500 rushing yards and 5 touchdowns in 3 games for the Seattle Seahawks. And, he's gonna do the Kenyon Drake thing where the Cardinals paid Kenyon Drake $10 million because he had 4 touchdowns in a game against the 6-10 Browns. So someone's going to pay Rashad Penny $5 million this year. It's going to be really confusing when they do, but someone's probably going to do it. Might be even the Seahawks now that I think about it. I guess the part I wanted to talk about with Seattle is I haven't heard one good reason for why the Seahawks should fire Pete Carroll. Like, I've heard reasons for why, but none of them have actually been good for why the Seahawks should fire Pete Carroll at this point.
It's just stale. Everything's grown stale, I guess, is probably the only thing you would say, really. And like you said, is that a good reason? Is that a bad reason? That's kind of like one of those standard NFL reasons. It's like, why is Andy Reid no longer the coach in Philadelphia? Things grew stale. I know he had one bad year, but obviously you would say Andy Reid's run of success in Philadelphia should have said he was still the coach there for 20 years.
Well, I'd ask the Seahawks, like, do you want to suck for the next 3 years? Like, this is a totally real question. Like, do you want to go through the rebuild for the next 3 seasons? Because you get all your draft picks back after this year. Like, the Jamal Adams trade picks are back. The Carlos Dunlap trade picks are back after this year. You get all your picks from 2023 going forward. So you can tear it all down right now and have a shit ton of draft picks, and you're going to suck next year. And the NFC West is really good right now. Like, there's a legitimate argument to be made for tear it all to the ground, just clear house and let John Schneider try and recreate the magic they had with the Legion of Boom. There is an argument to be made for it, but do you want that? If you're Seattle, if that's what you want, then you could fire Pete Carroll and hire a worse coach than Pete Carroll. Like, you could fire the $7.5 million a year coach and hire the $3 million Nathaniel Hackett to go through your rebuild or something. Like, you can do that if you want, but I would ask Seahawks, is that what you want? Because that's the only argument I could make for firing Pete Carroll is we're actively choosing to hire a worse coach than Pete Carroll.
Yes, it's a matter of want versus need. I don't think anyone wants to blow this up. If you're a Seahawks fan, why would you want to blow it up? Russ, Pete, they've given you so much more memories than you had in the previous 40 years of Seahawks football. So it's not something they want to do. I guess it's a question, is this something you need to do? And it gets a little harder when you consider stuff like Russ's contract, when you consider stuff like the talent on this team isn't as good as it was. We talked about with Jim Harbaugh, tractor versus trailer. I think that Russ is a tractor, but we haven't seen him be able to do it this year. Like the haul that the Seahawks have like put on his back is definitely a little bit too much for a lot of teams, especially an aging quarterback like Russ is starting to become, who's been doing a smoke and mirrors act for a decade. And now, we're starting to see the fruits of the labor start to come due here. And I think it's just, you need a change. You need to move in a direction, whether it's up, down, sideways. You just need to show that you're doing something to actively make this team better. And I don't know what the right move to make this team better is. I mean, are they a worse team if Pete's gone? Are they, it's a tough thing.
I think undoubtedly they are. If you get rid of all of these pieces, you're going to be a worse team. But the counterpoint to this is, and I make jokes about them all the time, is the Minnesota Vikings were at a crossroad after the Case Keenum year. And they said, we're going to sign up for 3 years of Kirk Cousins. We're going to sign up for 3 years of, we're going to try and keep it all together. And it didn't really work. Like, they were still fine, but they never got back to where they were. They had the one playoff win against the Saints and a couple missed playoff appearances. And then they signed up for Kirk Cousins again, because they were like, we're not ready to tear all of this to the ground. We just got Justin Jefferson. Dalvin Cook is still in his prime. Like, we're not ready to get rid of all of this yet. Have the Vikings been good the last 2 years? No. Are the Vikings going to get better? Probably not. Maybe they sign someone, but they don't have a ton of cap space at this point. But the Vikings have said, we're not ready to go to the bottom of the draft. We're not ready to spend 3 or 4 years. I think the reason for that is because Mike Zimmer and Rick Spielman, the general manager, are going to get fired if they do that. But the Vikings decided we're fine just being in the middle and fighting it out for a playoff spot. That's kind of where the Seahawks are at, except I'd argue the Seahawks are in a better situation because Russell Wilson is a Hall of Fame level quarterback, and there's a pretty good chance he'll still be that in the next few years. Like, I know he's 34 and Matt Ryan's 36 and he's starting to age out, but
I tell you, I just do not envy whoever the head coach is of Seattle or whoever the offensive coordinators are for Seattle, because unfortunate trend too with Russ as well is how coaches under Russ don't necessarily benefit from having Russell Wilson, especially at the offensive coordinator position. You look at the track record of OCs, none of these guys are OCs in Seattle end up becoming head coaches. So if you're the new head coach in Seattle, you're going to get a lot of blame or criticism if the team is just not an instant contender because you have Russ as your quarterback. And a thing that I've also kind of like lived off the principle of and have thought about it was there was a statistic last year, I believe, hearing that a team hasn't won a Super Bowl with a quarterback taking over 12% of their salary cap since Steve Young in the 90s.
Yeah, this is the trend, is that at a certain point, you can't compete with teams that have the quarterback on the cheap contract. I think only the special quarterbacks can defy that rule, but even for them, it's difficult. I think part of that is also Tom Brady kind of cheats the system a bit because he always took pay cuts. To the point with the Seahawks is, if Russell Wilson, if he demands a trade this offseason and is willing to make it ugly and he forces your hand, that answers the question for you anyways, is that you're forced into, let's maximize value on Russ. Let's fire Pete Carroll. Let's trade Tyler Lockett. Let's trade Bobby Wagner. Let's just clear house. Because if you're going to trade Russell Wilson, you got to trade everybody. If you're going to trade Russell Wilson, everyone's got to go and you got to, start from scratch. Unless one of the teams that's involved also has a young generational quarterback, which I don't think any team would trade a young generational quarterback for Russell Wilson. I don't think anyone who knows they have a quarterback is going to get rid of Russ, but even still, if you're going to trade Russ, you got to tear it all to the ground. Maybe Russ is finally willing to stop being corporate Russell and is willing to actually make things ugly and risk alienating the fan base in Seattle in order to get out of there. He wasn't willing to do it last offseason. Maybe he's willing to do it now. If that forces their hand, it answers the question anyways. But I'm operating under the assumption that Russ is going to do what is going to be the company man who said, not less than 4 weeks ago, in just the most cliche line ever, Derek Jeter played for the same team for 20 years and Michael Jordan played for the same team for 20 years, except Michael Jordan didn't play for the same team for 20 years. And Kobe Bryant played for the same team for 20 years. And it'd be cool to be one of those players.
Is there a Matthew Stafford possibility for Russ? too, by the same token, because Matthew Stafford went to the Lions. It was like, hey guys, I just think it's time, it's time that we move in a different direction. I don't think necessarily all trade situations have to be as toxic as we've seen the more notable examples of toxic trade situations become. Yeah. I think that there is a mutual agreement to be made there, in the sense that the Seahawks are at that crossroads where, yes, you said in a year they're going to be past this Jamal Adams trade and past this losing all their draft picks, but they still could benefit from getting a bushel of draft picks now. That would be a huge for that team if they could get that. Whereas Russ, he's at this point where, can I win another Super Bowl? Just for my legacy standpoint, can I at least get that second ring? Just to, even though we all agree he's a Hall of Famer, the lack of MVP obviously is going to hurt him in the grand scheme of whatever his legacy is. So at least if I could get that second ring locked up, then I'm going to be looked on more fondly when people talk about the greatest quarterbacks of all time. I think the only trades that make sense, and I think you kind of alluded to this, is if I could get a quarterback back. That's why I liked Las Vegas when that was a possibility floated, because I think Derek Carr to Seattle would be at least a good trade for them. You can make arguments. Miami, Tua, if you got Tua back, would Seattle be okay with that? Hell, even Davis Mills, who might be the second best rookie starting quarterback we've had this year.
No.
We're not doing
that Davis Mills shit.
You can't trade him to the Giants because you can trade him to the Giants, but
you can trade him to the Giants. You can trade him to the Giants. So this is the part also about you were saying whether you can have this is also a long preview on this game, but in the same vein, in the same vein of the Stafford, can they have an amicable parting of ways? It's a matter of whether the Seahawks want to tear it all down, because the Lions decided, we want to go through the 3-year long rebuild. We're going to be terrible, but we're going to get top picks. And that's the way we're going to try and turn this around. I said it during the draft and I still say it now. It might suck right now, Lions fans, but at least it looks like your team has a plan. And that should be very exciting. If the Seahawks are going to trade Russell Wilson, the best way to do it, tear it all to the ground. Start Geno Smith at quarterback next year. Start the Glennons or the Jake Fromms at quarterback next year. Like, guarantee that you can get the number 1 pick so that you can draft Bryce Young or CJ Stroud or whoever the generational quarterback is in 2023. Or even draft a generational edge rusher if there's one of those in 2023. If you're trading Russell Wilson, make sure you get the highest possible pick you can get in the 2023 draft. And that's probably going to be either from your own draft pick or the New York Giants being incompetent and somehow you ending up with the number 2 pick like the Dolphins did last year with the Texans first rounder.
Who's winning in week 18?
Oh, yeah, I forgot about that. Cardinals are going to win. The game doesn't really matter. I'll take Arizona. But if the Rams win, the Cardinals are the 5 seed anyways.
I'm going to go with Seattle. I'm going to go with that kind of storybook close, that magic in the air type, flowers coming down from the sky type ending for Russ and his tenure in Seattle, or Pete Carroll and his tenure in Seattle. Whoever is gone, they're at least going to have a storybook close to this chapter of their book. And
I would definitely take the Seahawks plus 6.5. But if you're asking me straight up, I would take the Cardinals.
Well, we live and die by straight up here. And I would say, I'm just saying, I could see this being one of those chaos Seahawks type games. And even though, again, they beat the Cowboys, I don't think the Cardinals are fully off the hook for their late December slide. I think that there is some things that they still have to answer. And I think it would suck for them to have to go into the playoffs on a whimper, but I could 100% see a possibility of it happening. There's a lot of questions there,